Good afternoon. This is Frosty Walker. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for the Texas Education Agency, and welcome to a second in a series of webinars regarding cybersecurity. Thank you today for your attendance and your interest in helping protect the resources that the citizens of Texas have shared with us. Today we'll be discussing establishing an information security plan using a framework summary based on 40 controls. We hope this information will be informative. We will allow time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. Should any of you have questions during the presentations, feel free to submit them, and they'll get queued up for the question and answer session. And if someone would drop me a quick note to make sure that they are seeing a full screen of the slides and that the audio is acceptable level, please do so and let me know. About 2 years ago, as many of y'all that have joined us on these webinars before, we started a Data Security Advisory Committee that is comprised of representatives from school districts, ESCs, TEA, and one member from the private sector. Those participating are diverse in size and geographically across the state. We're willing to share their needs and issues, ideas, and time to hopefully provide solutions for everyday cybersecurity issues in our education community. I would like to thank everyone that has worked on that committee and devoted their time and their efforts, and hopefully we're seeing successes with their efforts. The information that we're talking about today that's been reviewed by the Data Security Advisory Committee is indeed shared through the texasgateway.org portal under Cybersecurity Tips and Tools. And if you were to go to that URL, you would see cybersecurity data, cybersecurity tips and tools in the bottom middle of the very home page. And when we begin to talk about the information security plan today, if you go to the cybersecurity tips and tools, the very first things you'll see is a recording from the last session, and we are recording this session again today, and it will be also posted out there. If you go to the very bottom of the page, you will see documents. And you'll actually see two documents located there. One is the Information Security Plan Summary, and the other is the Incident Response Red Book. Today we'll be covering the Information Security Plan. We will have a webinar based on the information response and using the Red Book. If you download that Information Security Plan from that website and open it up, the first tab actually contains the cybersecurity framework and has all 40 of our security objectives on that in a spreadsheet format. The second tab has the security posture graph, and there also has the third tab has a full objective definition. What we've added here on the first screen is a short definition so that you'll get some idea about what we're talking about. Under definitions, there's a little bit longer, more thorough definition of what's going on. So I just wanted to share that does have 3 tabs on that. And the whole objective is this, is when we talk about information security, to be able to take a snapshot of what our security looks like at any given moment. And that could be as easy as somebody saying, are we secure today? And you knocking on wood and saying, yes, we are. Well, you just took a snapshot of your data security. This is just a little bit more comprehensive than knocking on wood and saying that, yes, we're secure. And every time you do work through one of these, you're taking a snapshot of that. And, you know, we're not going to set any time limits on when you should be doing that. The state of Texas requires all the state agencies to turn in something like this every 2 years, as well as the ESCs. They're also turning in work that follows these same 40 objectives. It's just not in this summary control. I actually review this on a quarterly basis because I can't remember over a 2-year period what we might have changed. So I began to monitor this in quarterly increments, but you could do that once a year, you could do that once a semester. You set your time limits to that. We are going to cover 40 objectives today, and we're going to cover quite a bit of information. So we're going to move through this and make sure that we have some time left over for questions. So if you open up the security framework, you will see on the screen there that the very first thing it talks about is an area. Well, that has to do with the framework. There are 5 areas in a framework: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And as we work through these, you'll get a better understanding of how the different objectives fit into those categories. And under identify, we're going to find that most of the things that are covered under identify, there's not a cybersecurity tool that does these type of things. This really has to do with identifying processes and procedures in your own organization. So this is something that in many cases you may have already in place. In some cases you may be missing some of that, but we'll work through this. And then in the next column is our security objective title, and then there is an objective definition. And then we have scores of what you might see in that. And the reason that we're going to input those scores so that we can actually generate a one-page summary that we can present to leadership to identify where that where our security program is. And I take this chart and I copy it into Paint, draw a red line where I think my due diligence, what I should be performing, and then it shows me successes that I'm having in my security program, and also issues or needs that I have in my security program. Then I can begin to take a look at those different categories and measure the risk in those categories and come up with a budget prioritized on how we need to address those things. And then the second thing that provides a graphic when we generate this is also, as we begin to get more of these, 2 or more, we actually have a chart here that shows our overall information security posture, and that's in the second tab. And you just input what your overall score is, which allows you to track your information security posture over a period of time. We're going to talk about how we score these in those frameworks, and we're going to talk about different levels. So level 0, it's non-existent. It does not exist in my environment. My organization, we're just not doing anything to meet that objective. Level 1 is initial. In other words, we're doing it on an ad hoc, inconsistent, reactive approach. Level 2, we're doing that on a repetitive basis, but again, we're probably not measuring that on a routine basis, and it's still primarily reactive, and our processes and procedures are undocumented. Level 3 is a more defined, a better documented, detailed approach to meeting the objective, and a key word here in this definition is regularly measures its compliance. We'll talk more about measures its compliance as we work through these. Level 4 is a step above that. It's managed, and we're actually using all of this risk framework that we're working through when we develop this to measure and evaluate risk and integrate improvements beyond just what may be minimal requirements legislative to address issues such as regulations. And finally, level 5, optimize, where we're using these as standards and practices to improve its capacities, become more cost efficient and effective. So those are the five levels that we're going to score in our information security summary. So now we'll talk about area, and I believe the first 11 security objectives have to do with the privacy. And again, we talk about privacy in the very first one, privacy and confidentiality. You know, what are we doing to ensure that the information and approved sharing, you know, we're doing this under defined conditions that are required to safeguard and assure the privacy and confidentiality of the information that we're using. And in this first example here, these are not scores from any entity. These are just scores that we randomly put in here. But I chose 50% at a level 2, which, if you remember, is repetitive, but not really, is still undocumented. And a level 3, which it is more documented, and we're measuring that for compliance. We could score that, you know, 20% in, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, as long as it equals 100%. And there's formulas embedded into this spreadsheet that will generate the scoring for you. We'll work through a few more of these, and then we'll talk more about some of the percentages. So number 2, data classification. Data classification, providing a framework for managing data assets and information resources based on the utility to the organization, financial value, impact of loss, and other associated risks. And so most of us will go, oh yes, I've got a data classification policy. I'm good here. Okay, you know, but are we following those procedures? And you just want to take a look at that. Do we have a policy that defines our data classification? And then are we adhering to those policies and have procedures? And again, in this case, I've scored, just put 75% out in one, where it's mostly you know, reactive and undocumented. But also in level 3, where we talk about measuring compliance, I've scored us to 25%. Item number 3, critical information asset inventory. You say, hey, once again, hey, I've got an inventory of my servers and my PCs. I've got that, and that's a great start. But also, we want to take an inventory of our applications and our software, because those also have value. Also, we want to take an inventory of where we have defined our sensitive information. We store that in a database. Which database is that stored in? So we want to generate that an inventory of those assets that are valuable, that contain, if they were lost by the school district, that we could identify those. And in this example, I scored us at 50% initial, just reactive, 25% repetitive, and 25% where we're measuring compliance. And if you'll stop and just take a look right down level 3, in every one of these we have something in level 3. And the reason for that is that in actuality, by working through this, we are starting to measure these components. And that is one of the key elements of level 3. So as we work through those things, we begin we're actually measuring those. And so we should provide a score appropriate for that. Number 4, enterprise security policy, standards, and guidelines. So, you know, do we define acceptable use? Do we have standards and guidelines on policies, how we handle that data that's been identified in data classification? And again, we probably are going to be able to check a percentage in maybe, you know, 1 in this case I scored as 25%, 50% in 2, 25% in 3. And somebody's going to ask, well, can we score 100% in one of those categories? The answer is absolutely yes. You know, if you think it does not exist in your environment today 100% and you're not measuring it, you can score that at a level 0. But by us working through this and measuring these objectives, we're actually accomplishing at least a piece of scoring a 3. So we want to take advantage of that. So by dividing that into percentages, we get a better overall perspective of what our information security plan really does look like. Number 5, control, oversight, and safeguardance, guidance. Catalog of security activities that are required to provide appropriate security of information and resources within our enterprise. So, what are we doing to protect that data? You say, well, I've got a firewall. Okay, that's a great tool. Yeah. But do I have processes and procedures on how we look at that firewall? So we begin to take a look at that, and people are also going to say, well, what if I miss something? This is a lot of information, and the first time you work through this, you're going to miss something. But in most cases, these things exist in different pieces somewhere in your organization, and you just kind of pull all this information together to see how well you're meeting that particular objective. Number 6. Information security risk management. Asset and evaluation of risk within the information resources and technology to ensure business operations are compatible with delivery programs and services effectively. And I believe our very next webinar is going to be talking about a whole risk assessment piece separate from what we're doing here. So again, if we'll start using that tool, but in the meantime, we always are evaluating risk, even if it's just verbally. So again, you're going to score something potentially initial. It's not documented, but again, we are doing that. So in this case, I spread 100% divided into 4 different categories. Security oversight and governance. And this is a set of responsibilities that are exercised by the board or our leadership team with a goal of providing a strategic direction for our information security plan. So do we have an oversight group that looks at this? And that could be all of our leadership. In fact, if you present the graphics to your leadership and begin to talk about your security and where you want to go, again, we're meeting this objective. We're looking at pieces of this objective. So it's not quite as difficult as the initial take on that is. But we do want to make sure that we include a value in that equals 100%. So I spread 50% in one, 25% in two, and again, we're starting to measure this objective, so I put something in our level 3, defined and measuring. Number 8, security compliance and regulatory requirements. We're monitoring legislation and industry landscape to provide security policy considerate to our organization. Yes, we have FERPA compliance issues. In some cases, we have legislative mandates for our education communities. So we take a look at those and see, are we doing a good job in complying with those? And then we give ourselves a score equaling 100% scattered across those 5 levels. In this case, 25% level 1, 25% level 2, and 50% in level 3. Number 9, cloud usage and security. So this has to do with evaluating the risk of using our cloud technologies. whether we're using that as, as a service or information as a service, software as a service, to make sure that our business objectives are capable of delivering the programs and services efficiently. And so this has to do with potentially some of the contracts that you may be negotiating with your cloud providers. But that is, again, that's a key component, taking a look at our overall security program. So in this example, I scored 50% in a level 2, repetitive but not well documented, and a level 3 that's more documented, and we're regularly measuring compliance on that. Number 10, security assessment and authorization technology risk assessments. And this is where we're talking about looking at evaluating the systems and the applications and the way that they're designed and the architecture that's existing to provide controls within those current applications and systems that we have, and how we anticipate we can mitigate threats with an acceptable risk tolerance. So this has to do with taking a look at how in many cases we buy something that's off the shelf, and we don't really have an opportunity to look at the architecture of how that's designed, but we do have the ability to look at certain controls, such as if it has sensitive information, does it allow for unique user ID and password, how long the length of password. Those are controls within an application. Does it require our users to change their password? Again, those are controls that are within those applications. So, when you begin to think about some of the things that evolve around an objective like this, they're typically there. We just may not have processes and documented procedures on what we're looking at. For security assessment and authorization, I scored in this example, level 1, 25%, 50% level 2, and level 3, 25%. We're going to move to the second group. And this is the number 11 is the last of our identify area in that framework. And again, we worked through those first 10, almost all of those had to do with processes and procedures and things that we do, not how we secure that data, but instead, do we have the processes and procedures in place and the ability to monitor those. Number 11, external vendor and third-party providers. And I'll be honest with you, this is not an easy thing to get a handle on. Evaluating our third-party providers and our external vendors to ensure security requirements to meet the information and information resources that they're being transmitted, processed, and managed by those external entities. For example, we write a contract with an external vendor, and do we have within that contract defined security controls, just like if they were an employee and the work was being done in-house. You say, well, gosh, that contract was written a long time ago. Okay, well then we'll document that contract was written a long time ago, and we may not have the controls in there that we might consider. But the next time that contract comes up, we need to make sure that when it comes up, that IT is involved in that process, and then we make sure that we include some of our security controls within that contract. In this example, I scored, a 1 at 25%, a 50 at level 2, and a 25% in level 3. Number 12. This is the first that we begin to move from identifying things and we begin to protect our resources. Enterprise architecture, roadmap, and emerging technology. So our information architecture, our information security architecture that is aligned with our federal, state, local, and agency data security and privacy requirements. And by measuring what we're doing through these 40 controls, we're beginning to build an enterprise architecture. Now, we're not building necessarily a roadmap, but we'll talk about how we can begin to do that when we finish all 40 of the controls. Security system services, acquisition, and development. So, you know, we want to ensure that the development and implementation of new systems meet the requirements of our security and information and our resources. So if we acquire, you know, we have a third party develop an application for them. You know, for example, we may want to put in the contract that you know, they run a vulnerability scan and mediate the high, medium, and critical issues that are identified in that, and provide you with a report once a year. That would be an excellent thing to include in it. Or if you want the ability to scan that yourself and then hand that report to them and say, okay, we need to remediate everything that's above a low risk. Again, we're working through how we can begin to secure our systems and services. And we also talk here about acquisition, but acquisition typically we don't see school districts and school systems merge that much from time to time, but that does happen. So we do talk a little bit about acquisition. We just want to make sure if we're involved in acquisition that you know, whatever we're bringing on board meets our security standards. So I scored, you know, 1 through 4, 25% in all of those levels. I want to talk about security awareness training and privacy awareness training, because primarily we'll talk about those together, because quite often what both of those, if you're buying an external package and using that, you know, typically computer-based training for your employees, both security awareness and privacy awareness are included in those. If you're not doing that, you're covering that in your orientation when you have new employees come on, and then you may be doing a refresher course from time to time. Again, those are things that you would cover in both of those. But your end user is your first and potentially weakest link that someone can social engineer and perhaps gain access to one of your systems. So, you know, I strongly advise that you have security awareness and privacy awareness included in your program. And you know, one of the things that the Data Security Advisory Committee has recommended and is shared out there in the portal is Cybersecurity, which has a free online security awareness and privacy awareness training. So, you know, I encourage all of y'all to take a look and implement if you don't already have. But in this case, again, we're monitoring that, so we know that we're at a level 3. If you've implemented it and all of your employees are taking that, you know, now we have we moved into a managed, you know, a documented process that you're measuring, and you know, you're working on ways on how to improve that. So both of those, I scored those 25% level 1 through 4. Cryptology, number 16. Establishing rules and guidelines governing the use of cryptology and key management in order to protect our data, and that make sure that information is not disclosed and it's inaccessible with the inability to decrypt. A good example of cryptology is do you encrypt your laptops? Do you encrypt your data at rest? For example, in a database, is that data that you classified as sensitive, is it encrypted at rest? Is it encrypted in transit? For example, you have an end user that uses SSL to come into your web gateway, and it's talking SSL. That is encrypted. That's a piece of the transmission, and you're encrypting that when you use SSL port 443. Is it encrypted from the gateway to the application to the database? Is that encrypted behind the scenes in all of those transmissions? Again, that's another area of encryption that you can take a look at. So those are some areas. Are you encrypting your laptops? Yeah. So in this scenario, I scored level 2 at 50% and a level 3 at 50%. But we'll take a look at all those places that potentially would be using encryption. And again, as you can tell, once we get into the protect phase, we're starting to get into a little more technical terminology. So in this case, secure configuration management. Do we have baselines and inventories of our hardware and software? Well, yes, we talked about inventorying that. But do we also inventory how they're configured? So do we have a backup of those configuration files in case something gets corrupt? Do we every now and then look to see if what our baseline is and what's actually running? Has somebody gone in and made a change that may not have been authorized that could potentially jeopardize a configuration? And the same thing is true on servers as well as application. All of those have configuration pieces to that. So you want to look at those elements. And in this case, I scored those at level 2, which is, we're doing it repetitively, but our processes and procedures are not always documented. But again, I scored 50% or 25% in level 3 because we are indeed measuring that compliance, and I gave us 25%, for in level 4. That we're going above and beyond what's regulatory and mandated for us to do. Change management, our next objective. And this goes hand in hand with the configurations. Do we have a change management policy? Do we have a set of rules? Can someone just go in and make changes on the fly? Do they need to let everybody know what changes have been made? It's a critical piece. And all of us that have been in the IT world have probably experienced something that, you come in and find something not running. You go, why is it not running? Did we change anything? I don't show anything in the change log. And sure enough, somebody changed something and didn't think that it would impact another application or something else. So we want to make sure that we have a change management policy and procedures in place so that we can monitor and review those changes and be able to roll back in case something doesn't work properly. So in this case, for change management, I scored us for this example with a 25% level 1, 25% level 2, 25% level 3, and 25% in level 4. Number 19, contingency planning. So now we're talking not only contingency, we're not talking about just disaster recovery, but contingency. Backup operations. Are we doing backups for all of our key applications and our data? Are we testing some of those backups from time to time? There's nothing worse than you go, I've got a problem, we're going to have to restore a backup and we can't read that file. And then we have to go back to the next previous backup and we can't read that file. And so, we look at those things, and so we need to have the contingency planning for backups and for all of our systems. And we talk about, what would happen if we had natural disasters and contingency planning in the case, and we see this frequently because our educational facilities are exposed to natural disasters. We, the Gulf Coast is susceptible to hurricanes. We have tornadoes. We have high winds. We have all kinds of different disasters, and all of those things should be looked at in our contingency planning. And again, you say, well, I'm just a security person. I don't know. Somebody in IT can point you in the direction of the information, of the contingency plan. Do we update it on a regular basis? So for this example, I've scored it 25, 25, 25, 1 through 4 levels. Number 20, protect media. This is a thing I'm going to be, this is easy. This is not easy to do. So, well, yes, I monitor my PCs. I provide malware to protect that data. But can somebody plug in, a 20 petabyte drive and download all my databases and walk out the door? USB sticks, CDs. Can someone copy data onto those things? Do I have a policy about in mobile devices about USB sticks and CDs and whether they should contain sensitive information? And if you're going to have to put sensitive information on those types of media, do I have a policy and procedures in place to encrypt that data should it be lost or stolen? So this is one of those that when I do this is my lowest score, because we talk about the federal government using Gorilla Glue and pouring it in the USB, and in many cases that is exactly what they do to prevent that. But this is one that we take a look at. In this example, I scored 25, 25, 25 in level 1 through 4. We'll move on to the next group, physical and environmental protection. Again, we're still in protect. And again, I compliment most schools that you have you don't let somebody in that doesn't have a background check. Your doors are locked. We're not talking just about your data center, but again, to somebody, we use key access to get into that. Those types of evaluation for your physical and environmental protection are measured under this objective, protecting my assets and my information resources. In this case, I scored 25% in level 2 all the way through level 5. Personnel security. So now we're also talking about our human resources are also a valuable asset to us, and so we want to make sure are we doing proper vetting of those personnel. In most cases, school districts, you've done background checks, you've got fingerprints on file of all the people that are working with your data and working with your students. So again, I think you're going to score pretty high in this category. In this example, I scored level 2, 25%, level 3, 25%, level 4, 50%. Third-party personnel. We want to be able to, when we negotiate a contract with a third party, and their personnel, we should also be negotiating that we have the same, policies for background checks. They may not have to do fingerprints, but at least do background checks to make sure that people that are looking at our have access to our data according to our security policies and standards have been vetted, and research has been done to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to protect those assets. So third-party personnel security, I scored this in an example at 25 level 2, 25 level 3, and 50% level 4. Number 25, system configuration, hardening, and patch management. So when someone brings up a new server or a new workstation, we go through and we make certain changes that have been recommended. In this case, most people use some type of a platform on their workstations that is then implemented across all their workstations. So they all should look identical, and all the security settings should be the same. And do you have a patch management program? And almost everyone has a patch management program that's running Windows. We get those on a monthly basis. If your server's running some other operating system in our database, patch management, and this is not just talking about OS, but are we patching our applications? Many of the vendors from time to time suddenly come out with, well, I've got a 0-day exploit. We need to upgrade to the next version. And are we responding to that in a timely manner? So that is under this control, number 24, system configuration, hardening, and patch management. And I scored this in the example 25 and 2 through level 5. Access control, number 25. Do we have processes in place to allow people to access our applications, our servers, our databases, our network devices, and make sure that it's just limited to those people that are authorized to do that? And in most cases, somebody is using either Active Directory or some type of LDAP authentication to say, yes, Frosty has access to this application and to this application, but he doesn't have access to that, another application. So, yeah, in most cases, you're going to have some level your access control. You may not have that across all of your systems. So in this case, I scored a 50% in level 2 and a 50% in level 3. Account management. So we're giving access to people in the control above, and now we're managing those, creating those and removing those accounts as needed. So when someone leaves, do we go through and say, well, we disabled their Active Directory account? Well, that's great, but do they have login accounts on other applications that may not be linked to or connected to Active Directory or to your LDAP services? So you need to take a look at that and see if you have policies and procedures in place that would cover to make sure that you get those accounts removed in a timely manner. Otherwise, you create an exposure to somebody, a stale account out there. So in this example, I scored at 50 at a level 2 and 50% at a level 3. Secure systems management, and many of us that have security systems, we have to manage those just like any other system. Are there patches that have been sent from the vendor? So we need to look at those whether that's our firewalls and whether that's our networking routers and our switches. We need to take a look at all of those to make sure that we have policies and procedures in place to update those and keep them updated, and just like if they were a regular server providing an application. In this example, I scored that 25% across 1 through level 4. Network access and perimeter controls, and that talks about servers, workstations, routers, switches, printers. Are we allowing people to access that need them and keeping those to authorized users only? So we need to take a look at how we're providing networking access to those types of things. And in many cases, again, we're using Active Directory. When someone logs in, we're monitoring and assigning them through global policies or through some type of a policy that's pushed down, belongs to me or in my group. And so we're actually doing some of these things. It's just typically done in the background. So this example, I scored 25, 50, and 25%. Internet content filtering, most of us have internet content filtering in place. You can see in this example I scored 25, 25, and 50. Data loss prevention, those of us that use Office 365, there is a data loss prevention tool that comes with Office 365. In this case, if you're monitoring all of your ports that are exporting data, looking for Social Security number patterns, some driver's license, credit card, any of that, then you're monitoring. In this example, I scored a level 3 at 100%. We're almost finished with our protection. We'll move quickly through this. Identification and authentication. Do we have user IDs, and do we validate user, whether that is indeed Frosty Walker or not, by accepting a password or tokens or smart cards? So in this case, I scored us a 50% level 3 and 50% level 4. Spam filtering. Most of us have spam filtering of some type. Do they block everything? No. But we have them, because otherwise our users would be spending all their day trying to delete mail. So in this case, I said we have that optimized and documented, so I scored a 100% at a level 5. Portable and remote computing, those indeed are unique devices. So do we have policies and procedures in place to address mobile devices and remote computing? In this objective, I scored us a level 1 at 25%, 50% at level 2, 25% at level 3. System communication protection, and we kind of touched on this before, but they actually developed this as a separate control. So this has to do with systems and how they talk to each other. And are we monitoring? Do we have our network segmented? Do we have databases in one segment? Do we have application servers in another? Do we have file system storage devices in another? Should my storage devices be talking to my database servers? Probably not. So do we have some limitations built in out there on what devices can talk to each other? So in this case, I scored, in our example, level 1, 25, level 2, 50, level 3, 25. Vulnerability assessment. I do vulnerability assessments quite frequently to determine if I've got problems within my applications, if I have issues within my OS operating systems. But do you have some type of documented process, which I do, but documented process that we test and look at those vulnerabilities? And again, in this scenario, I scored that as 25, 50, and 25. Malware protection. We actually do a pretty good job in malware protection. Most everybody is running some type of malware protection and antivirus. Do we have it in a policy that your workstations and your servers all have to have some type of malware protection installed? And if so, you're going to score higher in these. In this example, I scored 25, 25, and 25 across the board, because you may not have anti-protection, antivirus on all of your devices. Security monitoring and event analysis, and this is a technical term. They refer to this as SIEMs, but are you monitoring? You're looking at logs, what's going across the network, and looking for anomalies. Your system logs, are you taking a look at those? In this case, I scored 10% and 0, 20% 1, 30% 2, and 30% 3. You may not have a device to do that, but you may be manually looking at those logs. Again, that's a process, and you're doing it. You're just doing it much more labor intensive. Now we're going to get to a response. Cybersecurity incident and privacy incident response. Those two go hand in hand, but they are separate. You can indeed have a compromised computer and not have a privacy breach. You may not have had any sensitive data information on that server or that it could get to. So those two are different. We take a look at that, and in both of those areas, in both of those objectives, I scored, for cybersecurity, I scored 25, 25, and 50 in 1 through 4, 1 through 3. And then in privacy response, I scored a 50, 25, and 50. In most cases, those actually probably score pretty much the same if you have policies in place for that. And our last objective is disaster recovery procedures. Now, do I have a disaster recovery, whether that is a cyber attack or whether that is a, an act of nature that destroyed one of our data centers? And can I recover that? And if I have a failure, any of those things. And most of us have disaster recovery procedures in place, but are they updated? Who needs to be contacted? Who has the authorization to declare a disaster? Those types of things. You just take a look at those documents and see if we're updating those. And we also need to do tabletop exercises. It's amazing what we find out when we do a disaster recovery tabletop exercise. So those are a quick brief of all 40 of these. And if someone is working through these and they try to work through these and you're struggling with that, drop me an email. We'll set up an hour-long conference call. We'll work through issues and where you're having. Because once you have gone through all 40 of these, you'll see at the bottom it's going to generate you an overall score. But most importantly, it generates a graphic. And now I can actually look at my areas and see where I have success stories. And I can see where I have issues that I need to address. And then in this example, you kind of look at that and go, God, data classification. Well, now wait a minute. We talked about that's a process. That's identifying how we're going to treat what is sensitive information and what is not, and who makes that declaration, and then a process of how we process that. And wow, I can improve that by just establishing a process and making sure that we're adhering to our policies. So, in fact, I can tell you that 70%, according to Gartner, 70% of the issues that they find when they do a risk assessment is process oriented. It's not that I need a tool to make something, I can detect the bad guys. It has to do with our processes and procedures. So the whole idea, though, is I can quickly look and see. I've got success stories. I've got issues. Now I can begin to look and see I can address some of these. And some of these, for example, the security monitoring event analysis, I don't have the manpower to look at the logs. I actually need a tool to do that. I need to see if I can establish a budget of what it would cost to get me one of those so that I can do a better job in detecting if I've had malware or malicious activity on my networks. And then the same thing is true once you've done this multiple times, you actually begin to see your information security posture improve. And it could indeed drop down. You could have a language that an application is written in that suddenly has a vulnerability, and it's going to take you 6 months to resolve those vulnerabilities. And so you do a snapshot and go, that's going to take me 6 months. My security posture is not as secure as I was the last time I did this. But the next time you do it and you implement and fix those, your security posture takes a jump back up. but it gives you an opportunity to actually, in a visual sense, to see where your security relates to. And last, we're going to get, I know we're going to only have about 5 minutes for questions and answers today, and a reminder that we're going to do one more in this series on May the 10th, and that indeed will be about risk assessment and risk assessment tool that we've shared out there at the website. But I want to try to quickly address some of the questions, and I know early on we got some questions about where I could find that spreadsheet, and we will try to address that. As that is back, I'm going to zip back through some slides real quick here. Oh, there it was. So when you log on, or when you access the texasgateway.org and you find the cybersecurity tips and tools, and you click on that URL, it will indeed take you to a page that has the recordings. They're at the very front, and the documents are at the very bottom of this. So you'll actually see at the very bottom of the page, you'll see documents, and there's your information security plan. So I wanted to address that issue. And that is indeed at the texasgateway.org. We will, if anybody has trouble finding that website, drop me a line and I'll be sure and send you the URL for that. But that's where we're storing all of this information that has been reviewed by the Data Security Advisory Committee. And again, I'll thank those folks for their time and effort. Like I said, this is a summary of what the state agencies and your educational data, your educational service centers are currently filing every 2 years with the state of Texas. And I began to work on this, just trying to find a way that I could put in comments about what I changed so that in 2 years I could remember. And then again, hey, I can create a graph with this, and that makes that visual. And my leadership looks forward to it on a quarterly basis when we come in and review our program and show them where we were, a quarter ago. And I can tell you, I just did my quarter review for the first quarter of 2017, January through March. I actually documented 8 changes that we made to improve our security posture, and I raised my overall score by a total of 0.04. You say, wow, that wasn't very much. But when you're looking at 40 objectives, it takes a little while. So you're going to go, wow. I was pleased that I was able to document 8 different changes that we did to improve our security. So, are there any other questions at this time? We will document these questions and we'll pull them down, and I'll make sure that anyone has. I know we're just about out of time. It looks like we're about 1.5 minutes away from the webinar ending. So I also appreciate comments. If you think this is worthwhile, if you think we need to work on improving some of this, please let us know. If you have some issues that you would like to see the Data Security Advisory Council try to come up with some solution, drop that to me, and we'll see if we can't help in that way. And then we'll share all that information again out in the texasgateway.org portal, so that it's available for all of our educational committees. So again, I will thank you for your time and your interest today in securing the resources that are shared with us by the citizens of Texas. And with that, I'll give everybody back about 30 or 45 seconds. Have a great day. Thank you very much.